morning, everyone. Welcome to this month's episode of Action Items, produced by Let's Talk Supply Chain, brought to you by NewGenArchitects. My name is Dyci Sfregola. I am your show host. And before we get started, just want to give a little shout out to NewGenArchitects, our partner in technology-driven supply chain transformations. New ebook is out on the website. So head to the website and download NewGenArchitects.com. It is an ebook about the stakeholders who need a seat at the table for your transformation journey. Digital transformation, business transformation, whatever that might look like. We all know that supply chain transformation and digital transformation is a people-first initiative. So people in process, and these are the people that you need to give a seat at the table and give a voice for a successful transformation journey. So this morning, I have Jordan Goldmeier with me, and he is a digital nomad. He is a data consultant, data strategist, Excel guru, and I am so excited to have him. Nicole, can we bring Jordan up?
Well, hello.
Yes. Good morning. Thank you for joining. I'm very, very excited about this conversation. Genuinely excited. I think that as hosts, maybe we always say we're excited. This one I'm actually very excited about because I think it's a very, very important topic. So before we get started, last month we had a family emergency right when the show started, and my little one was having some issues that took us to the ER, but Kimberly Owens held it down and stepped in at the last minute. So if you are joining this morning, or if not, this will be recorded and go out into the internet world forever. Thank you. I am not forever in your debt, but I do owe you one. So Jordan, give us a little intro. How did you get here, man? You know, be like in a world where everyone is saying get out of Excel, and you're like, no, trust me, Excel still matters.
No, I mean, like, okay, so I've given this a lot of thought, and I think that I just want to say that, you know, when I choose Excel, people think I'm excluding other choices. I just want to say that, you know, Excel's been around for 30 years. It really is, like, in many cases, for many businesses, it's like kind of a very like modular plug and play solution, because you can add things, you can remove things, and you can build out these automations that, you know, that you're only thinking of. And only now these days do we have low code, no code, but Excel was the original. And so I think that it still very much has a place. It's not at the exclusion of others. And in particular, I would say that when we think about how Excel and any other piece of software is used now, it's always used within a stack, right? So my argument is that Excel has a place within your stack.
Yes, I agree. And I will admit that you made me a believer. So a little backstory, I did not come from an Excel world before I got into cloud-based technologies. So my indoctrination was get out of Excel, get into these cloud-based platforms that are going to make things faster. They're going to make it a lot easier to plan. You're going to be on, you know, a single source of truth, et cetera, et cetera. And while all that is very much true, to your point, there's still a place for Excel. So I love what you do. I really want to make sure that everyone is understanding, especially in the startup, especially in the small and medium business space. You know, we see so much on LinkedIn as it relates to supply chain technology, and, you know, these cloud-based tools that are, quite frankly, very expensive. They, between implementation fees, managed services, professional services, as well as the licensing fees, let's just be honest, it prices out a lot of businesses in the world. So there are times where even if you can afford that tool, it still makes sense to just do it in Excel for a little bit longer. Or, you know, some of the stuff that I see you post about on LinkedIn, I mean, I didn't know these features existed. And like, how many people actually know that Excel can be so powerful? And when you're looking at everything that needs to happen, all the pieces that need to come together, is it really the right time to, give up on the tried and true? You know what I mean?
For
It's
sure.
been around for 30 years, so it's
Right.
doing something right. So,
I mean, I think that's a fair point. I think that, with respect to some of the critiques of Excel, I'm not going to say that they're wrong, but I do think that what you're saying, there's sort of a magnitude of scale that a company passes when it makes sense. And like I was saying, and I guess, we're both thinking here in terms of the stack, there are things that you will do in Excel that other tools are going to eventually take over, and some things are still going to exist in Excel. I think that, like, for me, what I like about it is that you can build towards what you want. So if you go out, like, I've used Salesforce, I've used other CRMs. It's just every CRM I hate. And I think that's just like a thing about CRMs. No one likes them, but maybe I could be wrong about that. But like, I don't know how it is with supply chain tools. I have the sense that everyone always wants something different or wants something more. And even when you build it in Excel, it's the same thing. Like, you will always want something different and more. Well, if you can like accept that, as part of learning and growing, then what Excel will show you is what you want, right? Because now you don't actually have to go buy this big omnibus tool, or even if you're just starting out, something smaller that does it all, when you don't even, like, you're going to have to learn how to use it. I will say, though, the success of any sort of Excel implementation it does stem from, like, it does need at least like one engineering, nerdy, or finance type, someone who loves Excel to run it. And usually many companies have this. It's the CEO, the CFO, or the COO who are just very good at it. And so if you have that champion, then you can do it. But if you don't, like, it is harder. I will say it is
you
harder.
don't have the in-house expertise and the skill set and kind of
Yeah.
that master Exceller.
But many entrepreneurs, I do think many small businesses I'm thinking of in this case, they are people who are like learn at all costs. So they are the type of people who can pick it up and learn it and really love it. And then, know enough to be dangerous. And eventually they might get a developer, or eventually they might move on to another platform. Like, I've talked to companies who wanted me to help them evaluate whether they should do that. And the answer isn't always so clear, right? I mean, it's such a matter of objectives. But I will say, on top of all of this, like, if it's not an Excel place, maybe it's a Google Sheets place. As much as it pains me to say this, but we do live, in a world where people run businesses differently. If it's paper, right? Like, better to have one system than no system at all, and better not to, like, I don't want to insult the systems out there like Excel that are helping people around the world, when without it, they would be so much worse off.
Right. That's a good point. Before we get any further, there was a question that came in. I do not promise to get to that question. Maybe it is something that we'll end up just discussing in the comments after this recording comes out, just due to the time that we have, because our action items for this month, there are actually 5 questions that we are going to get through. So we have promised in the show description, the LinkedIn event, that we are going to be giving away to all of the audience a chapter in Jordan's new book. And I have read the chapter. Nicole will drop the link. It is definitely worth the read. And our action items actually come from that chapter. So there are 5 questions that we want to answer. There are 5 questions that everyone should be thinking about if you are embarking on one of these journeys and you have some individual projects that you're going to be looking to implement. The first question that we're going to talk about, this morning is, why is the problem important? Which is a great question, because we all have problems, we all have pain, but why does it matter to the business? Who does the problem affect? Again, back to NewGenArchitects, ebook stakeholders, who needs to be involved? Who is going to be affected by whatever changes we implement? And what if we don't have the right data? Not only in my mind, what if you don't have the right data? What if the data is there, but it can't always be extracted in the same way consistently? So this month it's in this format, next month it's in another format. the whole data piece of it. A question that I had never thought about that this chapter made me, really reflect on: when is the project over? So we do set these milestones, we do set a go live date, but there is also a world where, coming from like that continuous improvement, lean, plan, do, check, act, you have that evaluation process. When do we say this project is over versus we're now going into, we should just always be monitoring this process? We should always be monitoring when it's time for the next step. And then what if we don't like the results? Because that can happen. You think it's going to go one way. You can plan. You can scenario plan. You can risk manage. But sometimes it just doesn't work out because we can't see the future. We don't know what's going to happen. There's always the opportunity that's not right. So first question: why is the problem important? Actually, before I say that, I do want to give a little shout out. Jordan, let everyone know, you said that your shirt and other merchandise is for sale. For all the nerds out there that think this shirt is very, very cool and want one of your own, where can they get it?
All right. So right now they can find it at my, you'd have to go to @Jordan Goldmeier and then on my Instagram, and then you can click on the link in the bio and there's a shop right in there. Each shirt, we price them pretty well. So my buddy and I made them. We were just thinking of t-shirt ideas. So yeah, go ahead and grab one. Go to @Jordan Goldmeier, and then the link is in my bio.
Okay, perfect. Alrighty. Oh, look, Nicole is great. It is there on the show banner for anyone who wants to go grab one. Why is the problem important? Why is that an important question to ask? And How can people answer that? How can you go about answering that question?
Sure. So, one of the big reasons that, at least when we were writing the book, we were thinking about data scientists as our focus, but Alex and I have been working as, as analysts for a while. So really as any type of analyst, because we know this is what analysts deal with. If you don't establish why the problem is important, you can't really get people to care. And the other thing is, a lot of data scientists are leaving their jobs because they're working on projects that aren't impactful. And so as we look out and we see businesses running projects, some of it's just to get a feather in someone's cap, some of them are vanity things. It's really worth trying to understand what you're putting your dollars behind. I don't know if I could sell it any better than that really establishing the why behind the project before you go in is deeply important. And I think that there are ways to do that. On the one hand, there's a more like just philosophical way, like, why are we doing this? But of course, there are ways of doing it by identifying the objectives, right? So what are we trying to minimize? What are we trying to maximize? What are we trying to optimize? And that really is what's going to deliver, like, to you and to everyone else, what the value of this thing actually is. And if you don't really know it, then you're just gonna start a project that could scope creep on forever,
Right.
So,
I like that you say, why is it important? What's the value that it's going to bring? Because obviously, if you're thinking about ROI, you're thinking about developing a business case, that's one of the first things that you would imagine that people are asking. Not everyone does. I have, sat in discovery calls and asked, like, what are you looking to achieve here? Which is another way of saying, like, why is this important? Are you looking to improve certain KPIs? Are you looking to, on the supply chain side, increase inventory turns, reduce inventory levels, our freight costs out of the water? And sometimes the answer is, we don't really know.
Right.
Like, oh, cool. Let's just look at this $100,000 tool that we don't really know. We just know that it's painful. So that's kind of the more obvious, the business case, ROI, the dollars. What's the value? But I like that you mentioned people are leaving.
Yeah.
People are leaving because there is a world where you have to give people purposeful work. And there is a point in your career, and it might come at a different point for some. Admittedly, when I first started, it was okay to sit and configure, a tool for 16 weeks, then do training, and then find out 90 days later that actually no one's using this.
Right.
That was okay when I was first starting because I justified it, like, cool, it was a learning experience.
Right.
I still got my salary. I got a bonus because I was billable. But 3 years into it, I was like, hey, this is stupid. Like, I'm not just gonna
Yeah.
keep wasting my, like, this is a waste of everybody's time here because no one's asking these questions to begin with. So you already know when it's gonna start out bad. And at that point, I was like, I don't care. So why is this problem important, not only to the business, but to the people involved? Because you want to keep people engaged, especially when you're talking about your data scientists, your analysts. These are roles right now that are, everybody, they're in high demand. Everybody wants the best resources. So it's more than just here's a really fat paycheck to keep you happy. Here is some purposeful work that is going to make you feel good about what you're doing. So question number 2, who does this problem affect? I have a thought. How do you think that, teams can fully flush out who the problem affects?
I mean, when you say fully flesh out, I don't know if you ever can at the start of a project. I mean, you should try your best. I think the idea is just to go through the mental exercises of like trying to figure that out and seeing if you can really map an effect. And like, well, the whole point of this is it's very easy to say, well, of course we're doing this this problem for these customers, okay? But who does that affect in the operations? What other customers does that affect? In a case where it's going to affect real people directly on an operational standpoint. We said to name names in the book, like make sure that we understand that. I think too that, like we also wanted people to think broadly in terms of institutions, who run data projects and everything's kind of an average. It's like, well, who are the people we're really talking about with these studies and with this research or with our AI ML models? And I think that this is not something, just as in the same way that we said, connecting meaning to the work, this is something that also sort of disassociates the meaning when we don't really understand that at the end of the day, we're doing this for other humans. I mean, I suppose there are aspects that we do for other machines, but there are humans in the mix and they will be affected by it. It's not neutral.
Right, exactly. So underlining something that you said, calling it out, textbook, we call it voice of the customer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to affect your customer because at the end of the day, realistically, if you are embarking on any project, at least in my mind, there should be some thought of does the customer, like how will this affect our customer? Does our customer care? An example that I always use is, we need to have better visibility so that we can figure out like how to do 2-day shipping or how to do next day shipping. That only is a good project if you're in a competitive space where your customer wants 2-day shipping. If you're in a make to order space or a place where the customer has like specific custom specifications that they want, they might not necessarily care about 2 days. So that's not the type of project that you should look at. So I love that you mentioned the customer and just always keeping that in mind. One way, so the answer that I had in mind that I think that people don't necessarily always overlook. Sometimes they do overlook, but they also underestimate the level of effort and the time required to do this well, is to define and document the process. And I like to use the SIPOC framework, which I cannot say is mine. Like many people probably know what the SIPOC framework is, but your suppliers, your inputs, your process, the output, and the customer. And when we apply that to the actual process documenting, what that looks like is who is giving me this information? And now what am I doing with it? What is the output of what I did with it? And who am I giving that information to? So when we think about, okay, who was before me and where is it now going? That helps us to think about even, oh, is this going to my 3PL partner that is now external? Well, what is this project going to do to their system and how they handle our orders? Like, does the data actually need to be outputted in a different format? Does it have to be an Excel file?
Yeah, right.
Like we can't get rid of Excel. Is it like, so when it's coming from me, is it coming from my co-packer or co-manufacturer, again, who is not within the four walls of my company? So it gives more nuance, and you start to really see the complexity of, oh wow, this does affect more than just me or my team, or even whoever I think is across the aisle, on the finance team or on the ops team, or, whoever that might be. So I also like to use the, process mapping as a way to see who is involved. And then also how often, because if we're talking about data, we're talking about, these types of projects, we also want to be thinking about, is this weekly? Is it monthly? When is the data now stale that it doesn't matter? I hear all the time, real time. Do you really need real time? Like, is your business that fast? Let's set all buzzwords aside and really think about why we're here. Okay, very, very, very big question. Probably the one of the most important, if not the most important. What if you don't have the right data? Can you start the project without the right data?
I mean,
well, actually, let's not talk about what you can do. You can do anything.
Yeah, it's true.
Start the project without the right data.
I mean, I think it really all comes down to, well, what is right data even mean? Like, you can start the project with any data, but you really have to put it into context. And what we found when we wrote the book, Alex and I, at least what we had experienced was, well, if we didn't have a data, it would just be kind of like fit into a frame where you couldn't really use the data that way. And so we really wanted people to think about this. So, some data is what you have. If you like, obviously there are two types of data: observational, experimental data. Most data that businesses have is observational data. It is not easy to draw causality from observational data. Rather, we want you to draw from experimental data, treatment group, all that stuff. But I guess what we're trying to get at here is that a lot of people will still try to draw some causality from it, even though it's not the right data. And, just in general, we have this assumption that the data yesterday is going to be useful tomorrow, and it might not be. Conditions change. The market is very fluid. So what do you do when that happens? Well, you have to ask yourself the question, do we have the right data to achieve the objectives that we've outlined in the first question? Because even if you say, well, we don't have it fully, then you either have to moderate your objectives, or you have to sort of figure out what you're going to do to fill in that gap. So we don't see companies really doing this or even asking the question. It's just like, well, here's the project. Where's the data? Oh, it's coming in. Here's the data dump. Figure it out, right? So we really want people to actually think about that before they embark on the figure it out stage.
Yes. I've sat in many a conversation to say, these are the data points we need to calculate these KPIs, to do these, formulas and all the stuff that you want to happen. And I quickly learned that saying, do you have this data, is not really the right question, because the answer is almost always, yeah, I'm sure we have it somewhere in some system.
Yeah, right.
It makes sense that we would have that data.
Right.
Only to get into it to realize, no, you do not have that data. And in your mind, maybe you do have it, because yes, it is true. When someone makes an order, there is, a cost associated with it. But if you can't extract that, then, it doesn't matter. So making sure you have the right data, and saving everyone the headache, and just like doing it ahead of time. It's one of those things. I think that a lot of these questions get us into the world of, you do the work now, or you do on the back end later. And it's more painful later. It's more time consuming later. It's normally more expensive later, because you have to clean up what you mucked up in the first place, plus make it right. So it sounds like it is going to require more time up front, but in the longer scheme of things, it's actually, or grander scheme of things in the long term, it's actually better to just do the work up front. So let me take some time. We've got a lot of comments going here. First of all, everyone loves Excel.
I mean, not everyone.
This was the everyone that is here.
Yeah, right.
Excel is outstanding. We do have some questions and comments about Python or Power BI for analysis and visualization, which I kind of leave that to the end if we have some time. But I do want to maybe clarify that we're not necessarily like Excel is much larger than, oh, cool, like I need to visualize my data, or, like Python, Power BI, because we're then also talking, in my mind, we're getting into also a different skill set. So can Python or Power BI be better? Absolutely. I mean, we can go into an entire list of tools that is better than Excel. But the point is that we also have to be very cognizant of, we have to be cognizant of budget. We have to be cognizant of resource capacity. We have to be cognizant of resource skill set. And then we have to be cognizant of if you can acquire this skill set elsewhere. Again, very high demand for people who can do these things well, and especially in the supply chain space, that also understand the business and what the business is trying to achieve. So thank you, Sarah Barnes Humphrey, for joining, Rob for joining. Juliet says Excel will not go away. Like,
Probably
period. That's the thing. And Julie, highly utilized by finance and analytics. Absolutely. Also highly utilized in supply chain. Nella says, I think, sister, spirit sister, I am not an Excel lover, but a practical user. So I think that I might love Excel more if I had your skill set. If I could make Excel do all of the fancy things that you know how to do, then maybe I would love Excel more. Okay, and let's move on to our next question. When is the project over? Which I think is a very, very, very good question. Right. Because also when these projects are painful, if you can give people, like, we got to get through Q2. We just got to get through, Jan 15. Like, if you give them a date, I think that most people can do anything when they know it's going to be over. When it turns into this is never ending, then that's when you start to see turnover, burnout, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you want people, when you tell them you want them to think about when the project is over, what are some tips that they can, consider when determining what does project done look like?
Sure. So there's the most obvious case, right? What does it look like when we were successful? Most people think that that's what it looks like when a project is over, right? And that will get you to think about, tearing down the project. What does that look like? Does it go into maintenance? Does it end? Who takes it over? That's often as much as people think about near the end of a project, assuming it's gone well. But sometimes they don't even think about that. But what we really wanted people to really look at is what is the spectrum of events that would cause this project to be over? So one thing would be the data can't answer that question. What does it look like when that happens? What if the data can answer it, but you run out of funding? I don't know. I mean, there's so many different ones. The point is, I could list out these action items to do. I know that is the show, but I think that broadly, it's the exercise of going in together in a group and saying, what are we going to look for that would materially end this project and say, okay, this thing is over. And so having that in mind before you embark on it really does set the stage for not having surprises and understanding, just making sure everyone is in alignment for what a success looks like. What I don't want to even say a failure, because at that point, if you planned it out, it's not necessarily a failure anymore. It's just one of the trajectories that happens. So, you just want to be in alignment on that, because everything that we've talked about here, including this one, we don't do it. It causes vicious turnover. It causes things to scope creep. It is the problem that these projects keep going on and on. We're really trying to say, how do you take something from start to finish and actually, make good on the promise of data?
Yeah, the way that we've kind of approached this, and I cannot take credit for this. I will take credit for having a team of people who are almost all significantly more intelligent than I am. So this actually came from this idea came from Laura, and she's our managing director over at NewGenArchitects, and she was always on the customer side of these implementations. And I remember sitting down to like timeline out a proposal and talk about like next phase, next phase, next phase, because you do the initial assessment of where are you today, you identify where you want to go, but that's likely like you're not going to go from phase 0, you have nothing, to phase 4 that like everything is perfectly integrated and all the data is right and you have all the systems set up. There are phases. So identifying when this first project is over and when you give people a break, when you say, you know what, it's done.
Yeah.
We've done what we were going to do for this first step. We are going to not go into implementation fatigue. We're going to stop. We're going to evaluate what we've done. We're going to take some lessons learned. Did we answer all of these questions the right way the first time? If not, what could we have done differently? Let's make sure that this one goes, what other risk mitigation tactics can we take to make sure that this one goes a little bit better? So identifying when the project is over is also very important. Again, just avoiding burnout. When it goes on forever and when you don't have a win, like it's just going on and on and on. Like when the project is over, and even if like you said, it's not a failure because you always learn something. You're starting from a place of having a lot more information than you did the first time. So, but when do you celebrate that? When do you celebrate it and say, yes, this is done? Like we got it across the finish line, whether it was what we expected or not. And that's very important for team morale. That's very important to just keep the momentum going for the entire transformation journey. So what if you don't like the results? First of all, whose fault is it? Who are you pointing the finger at? Is it whose fault is it if you don't like the results?
I don't know. Like, I mean, there's so many reasons not to like the results. I think that we were thinking of stakeholders in this case. Like, you're an analyst, but you go give it to someone, they're like, we don't like this. So by virtue, you don't like it, right? Even though you were fine with it maybe 5 minutes before you walked into the conference room, right? So, this is also, we all assume, and so many companies just assume they're going to run these projects, they're going to implement these different technology stacks, and it's going to make their lives better. Of course it will, right? Of course we will find what we're expected to find. But what if you don't like the results? Which means not only did you not find something that didn't validate your assumptions, but perhaps you found very counter evidence to your original assumption that you came out to validate, right? So what happens? So hopefully in a good organization, in a data mature organization, a data literate organization, one with data heads who have read our book, Becoming a Data Head, mine, Alex's book, in that case, it won't be a surprise because you thought about it beforehand and you described what would happen. I think in the real world, what really happens is sometimes those projects get scrapped and no one actually talks about it again. Sometimes you bring someone else in who fits the data and hacks it into something manageable. I've been on both those projects and been that person.
Okay. Keep going there, because my question was, can you give us an example of, a real world example? Do not name names to protect the innocent or to protect the guilty, maybe.
Yeah, right. I've been a consultant. I don't want to like name examples exactly. I've been in a consultant where it was just like, we know this data is crap. Like, what can you do? And so in that case, you turn it into infographics, which is sort of a sad state of affairs. But I will say, it is still a skill to take any sort of data set and turn it into a set of facts to give to stakeholders. But in real life, what you would do in a mature data team, which I've done this in a good data team too, is to sit down and reflect on what went wrong and then create project steps moving forward. And you would also report the data as accurately and truthfully as possible to management. And they would say, and I've been in these projects, they would say, thank you for letting us know. We did not know that. And now we're going to take the corrective action. And that starts off a new data project.
Right. Now, what I heard just now, in maybe not so many words, and want to make sure that I'm extrapolating this properly. is what story is the data telling us?
Right.
As opposed to just like, hey, here are some numbers. This is a percentage that we calculated, but what is that story? Is it telling me that, the information that we're sending or receiving from an external partner is not always, completely accurate? Is it telling us that if we continue to go down this route, with this trend of what the data is showing us, are we headed for success? Are we getting into hot water? So not just looking at, and maybe that kind of goes back to, do you have the right data for this project? If you're understanding what the problem is and you've determined that this is the problem and this is the story, does the data that we have support that? Or not necessarily support, because I don't want it to make it seem like, hey, this is our hypothesis. Go find, hey, data scientist, data strategist, consultant, go find me the data and make it say this thing. But do we have the data that is the right data to determine whether or not this story that we think we're telling ourselves is actually what's happening? So that I would imagine, I'm no data strategist, but I would imagine that it is also something that is not a very, very easy skill. And I don't know, but when you go to, this is going to sound really, really silly. When you go to data school, when you go to data school, do they teach you like, hey, here are the numbers? But when you're in a business setting, you also have to help the business users understand what that actually means.
I mean, I think they try to do that. I mean, we can debate the degrees to which they do, and I think different programs have different attempts at it. I mean, I think that without going too far into the education critique of this, I just feel like, these are not questions that we expect you to answer in full. When I say answer in full, I mean like to resolve before a project starts. These are the questions that you must ask before they start, because going in, as we talk about as the first step often in data science projects or working with any data project, is an exploratory phase, which could really go on anywhere, right? It could go on any different trajectory. Everyone's going to run exploratory phase differently. But before you step into this ambiguity, wouldn't it be nice if you did have some of these questions answered? Because these are problems that people run into when running these projects. And despite the fact that at the end, we all say, oh, we should have a postmortem. Oh, we should have done it this way. We should have done it that way. We want you to do it that way. We want you to actually ask these questions before the project starts, so to have the chance to actually take that corrective action and have it in your head.
Right. And just to be clear for the audience, like, these are data projects, but it's relevant to really any project. It's relevant to any project. Getting a note here that we are trying to post the link to both Jordan's chapter as well as the ebook download onto LinkedIn, and it is giving us some technical difficulties. So it is going to be updated and posted in the show description. I'll share it. We'll share it out. We'll make sure that everyone gets it. We've just got a couple more minutes before we have to wrap up. And before I ask you this question, just in case we get cut off, want everyone to know, next episode is July 8th for our next episode of Action Items. Jordan, thank you so much for joining. And I'm going to close out with this question. And this was on my mind to ask you now that you are embarking on this digital nomad journey. And so many people are, we've worked in a lot of instances for years, and we've been remote. We've been providing value. We've been making things happen. And now that a lot of these projects are starting, one thing that I find myself, because I don't really know who's back in the office, I don't know, where teams are. I don't know whose hiring strategy was, in 2020, 2021. I don't care where you live. as long as you can do the work. So I'm finding myself asking a couple times a week now, is your expectation that people will travel to you, or is your expectation that this will be done virtually? How do you determine which projects you think are conducive for the digital nomad lifestyle
Well,
versus, no, this is going to require us to collaboratively be together in a physical space?
Well, I should say that, like, I don't actually have a problem with traveling to the client. I mean, like, to me, that's part of the digital nomad lifestyle. So if you're somewhere and they say, oh, well, we want you to come in for 3 weeks, my view is, well, as long as you pay for it, like that's digital nomad life to me. I can get up and do that. I don't have children. I'm not married. So I have a little bit more freedom than I think a lot of people my age necessarily have. But I do think, to me, that is part of the digital nomad life, is in terms of like, what work do I pick up? What work do I say no to? I'm at a point that most people who come to me like get what I'm about. They don't have an unreasonable expectation. I mean, someone who says we're looking for a contractor to sit in a seat, I just say, listen, like, that isn't me anyway. Even if this wasn't a pandemic, I'd still want to run it this way. So like, I would say that I generally just attract the right customers because, you look at me and my crazy hair and stuff, like, there's a certain customer who wants me and there's another customer who doesn't. So they don't usually come to me. And if they do, it's very clear very early that we're not going to be working with each other.
Right.
Respectfully,
Yes. And you know what? I think that's a very good comment to make, because, I remember posting, I don't know, all the days run together. So it could have been a couple of days ago. It could have been weeks ago. I don't remember. But, I read and I had spoken with someone that I, consider a mentee. And she was like, I was told that we weren't going to have to go back to the office. Now I'm required to go back to the office every day. I'm driving 45 minutes to sit on Zoom calls all day. This does not make sense. So I posted and asked my network, no shade to anyone, serious question. If you are requiring people to go back to the office, why? Like, what is the idea behind you must come here and sit in this seat every single day? And there were some good comments, but I remember reading one comment that said, you know what? Some people want to go back to the office. Some people want to be at home. The companies that require people to be back at the office will attract the talent for people who want to work in the office. People who want to work at home or wherever, they will be attracted to companies that allow that. So I'm drawing a parallel here with you saying, there are some companies who want you to sit in a seat, and there are consultants and firms that will do that. And there are other people who don't want you to be there, and there are consultants and firms that will do that also. So I'm thinking that the answer to my question is, when should it be in person versus when can it be remote? Really depends on the client. And it really depends on maybe their internal level of digital maturity. Have they adopted? There are a lot of collaboration tools. You've got, project management tools. You've got chat tools. You've got things have run the gamut. Anything that did not exist before 2020 now has existed, plugins, et cetera. So if you've got a digital tech savvy, team, then you might not need people to come into the office. They might be, these digital natives that prefer virtual work because the time that they're spending getting ready to go to an office is better spent actually talking about the problem. So the answer to my question is it in person or is it remote? It depends on what is best for your team. It depends on what is best for your company, and just find the consultants and the resources and the internal talent to make that happen.
For sure.
Yeah. Any parting words? We've got 45 seconds.
Sure. I mean, this is always my parting words on every podcast. This is a moment right now that we all have. If you've been thinking about doing something differently, whether it's changing jobs, whether it's becoming a digital nomad, writing a book, starting your own business, whatever it is, take a vacation. This is the moment to do it. Don't wait another second. Just go ahead and do it, because like, we're at a very interesting time in the world right now. So that's my talk.
I love it. I love it. All righty. Thanks so much, Jordan. Nicole, thank you always for being awesome. Everyone that joined, thank you for all of your comments, your engagement, and we will see you next month on Action Items.